Hey, Bismillah and Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brothers and sisters and friends. I hope all of you guys are doing well. So today we have a very interesting session for you guys, which we've titled A World Without God, from Existential Nihilism to Islamic Theism, or Life Without God, whichever way you want to look at it, inshallah. But what we're going to be discussing today is a topic which is near and dear to my heart, something I'm really passionate about, and something I, really want to push and emphasize, which is the implications of turning away from God, the implications on one's life as an individual, as a society, as a community. What are the implications one has to face when you turn away from God? And this is something we're going to be exploring and looking into a lot of detail today. So a few key things or points we'll be covering in today's session is, number one, we're going to look at a brief history of how we ended up where we ended up, how we've ended up in a world where secularism is prevalent, atheism is, you can say, on the rise to whatever degree it is, although, there is a lot of hype there and things are blown out of proportion in regards to how popular atheism is and how many people are actually following this worldview or adhering to it. We're going to also look at atheism and naturalism, and we're going to look at the difference between these terms and the different shades of atheism. We're also going to look at the implications of such a worldview when you deny God and you turn away from God, whether that's in the form of atheism or whether that's in the form of any other philosophy or ideology. We're going to see what that means for you. What would happen, or what would you have to face, and what would you have to acknowledge in your life when you turn away from God. So we're going to look at how atheism, naturalism, or other ideologies result in no ultimate hope, no ultimate justice, no true value, no happiness or purpose, etc. Then we're going to take a look at atheism and existential nihilism and the nature of man and how all of these things play with each other. Following that, we're going to look at the proposed solutions that are given by individuals who ascribe to such worldviews in regards to existential nihilism, how to overcome it, how do we deal with it, how do we live in a way where we don't have to deal with the implications here. That's what we're going to look at and explore further. Propose solutions to the problem. So we're going to take a look at that. Sorry, repeat that same thing again. Then following that, we're going to look at why it's a problem. Why is nihilism a problem in the first place? And finally, we're going to look at how Islam is the solution to these issues and problems that we face, or the human being faces when they adhere to atheism or naturalism. So 3 key things I hope that you guys are going to take away from today's session, inshallah, is number 1, how we ended up in this godless world. Number 2, the implications of atheism. And the reason I want us to really appreciate this today is because a lot of the times when we have discourse with atheists and we engage with atheists, we tend to immediately go into a sort of rational discussion where we're sharing arguments for God's existence and they're sharing arguments against God's existence. And then it becomes a battle of, the intellect, and just to see who can justify their position in a stronger way. But something I want us to appreciate here is that atheism is bankrupt foundationally. The implications of atheism put you in such a situation where you can't even begin to account for some fundamental truths that make you a human being, and further, atheism can't even account for the fundamental principles you need in place for you to have a rational discussion or discourse with someone else. So I want us to really appreciate this. So before we make atheists or put the atheists in a position of judge, and we say, look, here is my presentation, or here is my argument for God's existence, now you judge whether you believe God exists or not. Before we even give them that position, we're going to explore and see, well, are they even qualified to be a judge, right? So that's something we're going to look at today. And finally, we're going to hopefully appreciate and see that atheism, it doesn't exist because it's a rational position. It exists because of its utility from the perspective of the world that we live in and how it's in line with other philosophies and ideologies in the world that we find ourselves in today. So let's make a start. And the very first thing I want to look at is sort of a brief history of how we ended up in this world. Because look, we're born in the 21st century, right? We're born in a world And when we grow up in this world, and we therefore are colored and influenced by society, educational institutions, ideas, and the philosophies of the world that we live in. And we can't help this, whether we're Muslim or non-Muslim. We're just colored and shaped by the world around us. And therefore, unfortunately, in many cases, Muslims run into issues because of this. And so do non-Muslims, because they find it very difficult to appreciate certain realities. We're molded to think in a certain way and see the world in a certain way. And therefore, it's very important that we appreciate the history that's led to the world that we find ourselves in today. And therefore, we can really understand how we ended up where we are. And we can also see how do we deal now with the issues and problems that we find ourselves facing because of, the philosophies that are governing the reality that we live in today. So it's very important we understand this. And I want to start just briefly taking a look at the pre-modern world. And let me just define these terms briefly here. Obviously, there are many ways you can define these terms, historically speaking. But when I refer to the pre-modern world, I'm referring to the period prior to the Enlightenment. So prior to the 18th century. And I want to go back as far as maybe 1,000 years, right? So the year 1000 maybe, and work from the year 1000 all the way up to the 18th century, the 1700s. Now, this period, from a European perspective, was a period where the world was governed by Christianity. And every facet of life was governed by Christianity, whether it's education, commerce, law. Christianity dictated every sphere of life. Now, there were some positives in regards to this, because for one, which is obvious, which is that humanity was connected, or to some degree aware of the true purpose of our existence, which is to recognize God and to worship Him. Although obviously at that time we know that the Christian doctrine that existed was not what Isa alayhi salam, what Jesus had brought to the world, and therefore the Christians were adopting or following a sort of distorted conception of who God is. But nevertheless, they were still connected with realms beyond the physical. They were still connected to God to whatever extent they were able to be. So there were some positives, but there were a lot of negatives too. Now, one of the issues which we see people were facing throughout these centuries was there was an agitation, a struggle that was taking place, because the Christian world was becoming aware of the Muslim world, and they were also becoming aware of how the Muslim world was able to reconcile reason and revelation, how there was a beautiful synergy that was taking place there, how the Muslim world was flourishing. And we see, for example, there were certain Christian theologians and thinkers who tried to achieve the same synergy. For example, Thomas Aquinas was one individual, as is mentioned in the book Rethinking Islam in the West by Ahmed Paul Keller on pages 82 and 83. He mentions that Thomas Aquinas, for example, understood and he saw that in the Muslim world, you had the likes of Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and others who, were engaging with the sciences. They were engaging with rational thought, and there was a beautiful amalgamation between reason and revelation. And he tried to achieve the same. And he tried to do this in his introduction to theology, but he failed. And the reason he failed to do this was because the fundamental doctrines of Christianity, the fundamental tenets of Christianity, their very theology was adverse to reason. It was averse to reason. It was anything but rational. The concept of the Trinity, they ran into problems. They couldn't explain this rationally. Hence, in this quote, he says, in this particular quote, "There lay at the heart of this schism a profound theological problem with Christianity. The relationship between faith and reason that did not arise until a higher understanding of logic, philosophy, and metaphysics was introduced through the works of Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd. Aquinas, in his Introduction to Theology, attempted to achieve the synthesis that had been realized in Islam, but was unable to do so. Reason encountered fundamental contradictions when approaching the incarnation and the Trinity." And this was an issue that was prevalent within Christianity. There was always this struggle, and hence you had certain theologians, such as a Protestant theologian, Martin Luther, I believe in the 15th or the 16th century. He, didn't mince his words. He was very clear with his disliking towards reason. And he came out and he said reason, he referred to reason as a whore, the greatest enemy of faith. right? And this now further progressed up to the 17th century, the 18th century, where whenever a free thinker, emerged, someone that wanted to discover and understand the world, someone that wanted to engage with reason and rationality, they were persecuted, they were tortured, they were burnt at the stake, they were killed. And this eventually, all of this agitation then resulted in the period of the Enlightenment, where people, some thinkers said enough is enough, and a type of rebellion took place where, eventually people got together and they were like, you know what, we need to move forward. We're not gonna succumb to the dogmas of the church anymore. We're not gonna succumb to this sort of outdated way of looking at reality. We're rational beings, and to be honest, as a side point, brothers and sisters, it's a part of human nature to use the aql, the intellect, the rational faculties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. And what's very interesting is that you can't suppress this. It's a part of our very being. So we're going to use reason. We're going to reflect, and this is something that Islam encourages, as we'll see later on. But it was something that the church and Christianity, generally speaking, discouraged and they disliked. Hence, you had the Enlightenment movement where thinkers got together and they said, we're going to do away with this dogma of Christianity. We're not going to worry about Christianity anymore. Nevertheless, there were people who were all about reason and rationality, but there weren't people who turned away from God. They may have turned away from Christianity in the church, but many of the thinkers of the Enlightenment period, if you were to ask them, well, do you believe in God? They would acknowledge God. They would say, yeah, we believe there is a creator. And this was the very reason they engaged in the sciences, to study the world, because they believed that there was a creator that created this natural world. And through studying the laws that were present within the natural world, to studying nature, we would get closer to understanding the mind of God. This was their thinking, right? So there were people who leaned towards natural theology, as it's known. Natural theology, meaning people who believe in a higher power or creator, and people who are therefore studying the world in wanting to come closer to an understanding of this higher power. Right? Something I believe, if these individuals had come across the true understanding of Islam at the time, which they didn't, and there's reasons for why they didn't, but if they had come across the true understanding of Islam, they would have really inclined towards Islam. And I would even say many of them may have become Muslim, or at the very least favored Islam. A brilliant example of this is in Voltaire, a philosopher from the 18th century, who initially, when he read some of the early translations of the Quran and came across material on Islam, which was, by the way, being done by some of the Christians, the missionaries, he had a huge disliking towards Islam, a disliking towards the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for the Prophet, peace be upon him. So much so that he wrote plays against the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he mocked the Prophet. But later on in the 18th century, when he actually came across a decent translation of the Quran, which was done by Sales, he changed his views, and he even spoke highly of Islam, and he defended Islam against other individuals who were actually speaking out against Islam, because there was a view amongst many of the thinkers at the time that Islam was a religion of extravagance. It was a religion of luxuries and worldly pleasures. And it's interesting that the Christian missionaries were pushing this type of idea, because one of the issues that the church had was because of its injustice and the misuse of its power. Many of the popes prior to the Enlightenment, after the Renaissance, almost took on the garb of emperors of the past. So they were the ones that were living in luxury. And it's almost like when they were exposed, now what they wanted to do was they wanted to paint Islam in a negative light as well, so no one inclines towards Islam. But when people like Voltaire actually came across the true message of Islam, they actually spoke highly of Islam and defended Islam. So what happened during the Enlightenment period basically was several things. They moved away from the church, they moved away from religion. And as Professor Leo Damrosch, in one of the brilliant course, by the way, I really encourage you guys to go through, the Enlightenment Invention of the Modern Self, by the great courses. If you have Audible, you guys can go and listen to this course. One of the things he mentions, one of the ideas of the Enlightenment was to get human beings to disconnect from the vertical plane and to focus on the horizontal plane, meaning they wanted people to turn away from ideas of the hereafter, from ideas of a paradise, Jannah. They wanted to move people away from an eternal life that's coming in the next life, and wanted people to focus on this life and progress in this life. And one of the ideas they sold people was that of a utopia on earth in the future. So man was to focus on the world and progress in the world to attain this perfect utopian world, this perfect utopian future in the near coming future. So this is what they wanted people to focus on, right? And what's very interesting is that you see, therefore, even in individuals that came shortly after, such as Marx, for example, he took an aversion to religion. He disliked the idea of religion because one of his issues with religion was that it made people comfortable in the little that they had, right? So remember, he wanted to push socialism, right? This idea that, look, capitalism has flaws because the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. So we want to make it that people all are on the equal plane from a social perspective and a financial perspective. And one of the and for him to achieve this, man again had to be focused on the material world and progress in the material world. It had to be so that man was uncomfortable with having little from a social and economic perspective. And he knew that what religion did was it made man comfortable with little, you know. So, and he disliked this idea. He wanted people to be uncomfortable if they weren't doing well socially and economically, because only then would there be a drive to move forward and to progress from a worldly perspective, right? So they wanted, the thinkers at the time and the ones that came after, they wanted people to disconnect from any reality that was beyond this material physical world, and they wanted people to focus on the material. But what happened during this endeavor was people fell out of balance, because what wasn't recognized and appreciated that human beings are physical material beings who have material needs, but they're also spiritual beings. But the Enlightenment got humanity to focus on the material, and by doing so disconnected human beings from the spiritual aspects of reality, and inevitably human beings were going to fall out of balance. The other issue was, or one of the things they wanted to achieve was, they wanted to achieve a blend of reason and revelation. So another interesting point was that they didn't want to let go of religion altogether or revelation altogether, because they realized that if you were to turn away from God completely, well, then that throws man out of balance, also from the perspective that now nothing is objective. There are no absolutes, there are no truths, there are no ethical, moral truths. So they took the good from religion from an ethical standpoint, and they took from Greek reason and rationality, and they brought these two things together and amalgamated the two in a way which worked, right? And also the new goals, they gave humanity a new goal, because nihilism was an imminent threat and danger that they faced. Because again, if you take people away from religion and God, then human beings, well, there is no ultimate meaning or purpose to life, something we're going to explore in a few moments. So what they had to do was they had to sell another vision to humanity, something we mentioned already, to ensure that people don't fall into existential nihilism and they don't experience the pain that's accompanied by existential nihilism. So what they did was they sold this vision of a future utopia, as we mentioned already. Now, obviously, alongside this, you had other revolutions which were taking place at the time, which more specifically, paved the road to atheism. And this was something we'll touch upon in a second. So that was the Enlightenment period, which led to modernism. And the objective of modernism was for humanity to focus on a worldly utopia, for humanity to focus on the material plane, the physical plane, to achieve as much as they can from a material physical perspective. And obviously this leads to materialism and consumerism and all of the other ideologies and philosophies which resulted. That was then. But in the 20th century, we had another almost revolution, another intellectual revolution, which was of postmodernism, and which basically came out and highlighted the problems with modernism, highlighted the flaws of modernism. They had an aversion to the modernist mindset. They pointed out, that this whole promise of an amazing utopian future is not true. You failed, basically. And they had a disliking towards modernism, almost an aggressive rebellion towards it, where they wanted to sort of disprove it and completely turn away from it. Because they said, look, what has modernism resulted in? You sold these amazing dreams to humanity. All it's resulted in is World War I, World War II, capitalism, colonialism, the Soviet Union, socialism, and all of these isms and schisms which have come about by this, and all of these wars that resulted from this war have led to a lot of destruction. Let alone a perfect utopian future. It's the opposite, right? So they basically, the whole underlying philosophy of postmodernism is there is no absolute. But what they basically have done is they have fully followed through the implications of turning away from God. There are no absolutes. There is no truth. There are no objective truths or realities. It's all subjective. It's all up in the air, right? It's all about opinions of any group that's in power, right? There are no absolutes in any way, shape, or form, right? It's like we live in a world of pick and mix now. This is the world that we're a part of today. Anything goes, pretty much, right? Words have no meaning. We define them as we want to define them. We understand things as we want to understand things. So, like I said, fully following through with the implications of a world without God. The purpose is to deconstruct everything. Deconstructionism, this type of ideology which emanated alongside, which is, to break down everything to its core opponents and just call a spade, right? So in a way, something you have to commend them for is they exposed some of the lies of modernism by highlighting, look, all of these absolutes that you're claiming, without God, there are no absolutes. But at the same time, they didn't deal with the real fundamental issue, which is humanity turning away from God, right? They didn't deal with this, and therefore they too are falling into the same problems. If anything, they're just, like I said, they're following through with the implications of turning away from God fully, and therefore now we've ended up in a world which is almost completely nihilistic. There is no meaning behind anything, literally. There is no ultimate truth or meaning, as they would say. We interpret reality as we choose to do so. I become what I want to become is the type of motto, right? So whatever goes, pretty much. Some interesting quotes. The freedom to choose to do and be anything and everything makes us all consumers of reality. Another very interesting quote, I think this one summarizes the point a bit better. In modernity, nihilism may be conceived as the devaluation of life resulting from the secular project of the Enlightenment, which trades off the sense of meaning and value supplied by myth and religion for the gains of an increasingly rationalized world. The goals of modernity, however, take on the form and function of the religious categories of meaning and value by positing a future utopia, displacing the source of value from an afterlife to a distant future. In modernity, the religious eschatological narrative is replaced by a grand narrative of the emancipation of man as the universal subject of history from suffering. This grand narrative supplies human existence with a sense of orientation and meaning in place of the old religious doctrines. The nihilism of postmodernity, however, is characterized by the bankruptcy of this grand narrative of history and the subsequent loss of the sense of meaning it supplied. So this sort of summarizes exactly what's been going on. Modernity, tried to deal with the problem of existential nihilism, at least, by selling a new vision of a utopian future in this world. Postmodernity has just exposed that pretty much. Now, here's another way we can look at what's the sort of history of the past 1,000 years. Initially, the pre-modern world was where man focused on God, although from a Christian perspective got many things wrong. The modern world was a time where man was made to focus on the material world and worship the material world. And the postmodern world, which we're a part of now, is where man has rejected all of this and almost has started to worship man. Human beings have started to worship themselves. This is where we've ended up today, because they haven't addressed the real fundamental underlying issue, which is human beings have turned away from the Creator and therefore have been thrown out of balance. Now, where does atheism come into all of this? Atheism is not in a vacuum. And the reason I wanted to present this sort of backdrop to you guys was because when you look at atheism, one thing you realize is, or when you start to look at the foundations of atheism, one thing you realize is that atheism is a very weak position. It doesn't have its foundations are very shoddy, they're very weak. It doesn't really have legs to stand on. But then it makes you think, well, why do people still adhere to it? And the reason is because it's in line with these underlying philosophies which govern the world today, right? Because we live in a world which pushes you to focus on the material. What does atheism tell us? There is no creator, there is no God. You only live in this material physical existence. What does naturalism tell us? Everything is matter. Focus on the matter, right? So it's in line with all of these other ideologies. It puts the human being, it removes all guilt from the human being. It puts the human being in a position where they have no other choice but to focus on the material world. Let's just focus on the material. We've got one life, YOLO, do whatever you want, make the most of it. And then we're sold these other visions like, it's all about how much you can gain and how much you can make in this world and how much money you can attain, and how much of a luxurious life can you build for yourself until you die. But the funny thing is, when you die, you don't take any of it with you. And this is something, again, death is something which is sidelined and people don't really are made to think about it. We're made to think about life and to make as much as you can in this world, but death is not spoken about, because death is one of those things which again puts things into perspective. And this is why, subhanAllah, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions death continuously over and over again, because it's something that gets the human being to refocus on what's actually going on here. You're not here forever. You're not going to live forever. So what does this all of these things that you're amassing here mean? What does it all mean? Where are you going to take all of this? When you die, that wealth you've acquired in your life is no more yours as it is your enemies. You're just leaving it all behind. So, but people don't think about this. So we're sold this sort of materialistic notion of reality. Again, I don't want to get into the details of this here, but all of these ideologies work together. It's almost like a well-oiled machine. You have money drives everything. Money, the pursuit for the material drives everything. All of these models you have, such as capitalism, which drive, consumerism, and to have consumers, you need to create a need for consumerism, and then to have consumers, well, you need to sell a philosophy of materialism. And for you to sell a philosophy of materialism effectively, well, you need some other philosophies in place, such as atheism and naturalism, which put the man in a position where they can't focus on anything other than this material world. It's really interesting that the way all of these pieces come together and fit together, right? So just to emphasize the point here, atheism, to whatever degree it's prevalent, is not prevalent because it's rational, it has strong foundations. It's because it fits. It's that piece that fits the system very nicely. That's the only reason. Okay, so let's just quickly define atheism and naturalism, right? We've also already discussed how atheism and naturalism fits into the whole system of what's going on here. What's the difference between atheism and naturalism? They're very similar, but just one difference I want to highlight here is that, generally speaking, and again, there's no defined, although you'll get dictionary definitions of these terms, but there's nothing that's solidified here. But generally speaking, if we talk about atheism is the idea there is no God, there is no creator, there is no personal Abrahamic conception of God, and that's essentially what they will say, that there is no God, there is no creator behind everything that exists. The naturalist is a bit more hardline. The naturalist is a bit more clear cut, if you like, in his perspective, and he would say, look, all that exists is the material physical realm. It's all matter in motion. Even if there is something behind this material physical existence, it has nothing to do with this material physical existence. Everything that we see that's in existence is a result of prior physical causes, and it's all physical things leading to other physical things. The atheist may say, most atheists will be naturalists, as in, for example, Richard Dawkins. And I think this is what Richard Dawkins himself has said. Most atheists are naturalists. However, there may be some atheists which leave the door open slightly to other explanations. They may say, some atheists may turn around and say, well, I believe there may be something out there which is beyond the physical, but it's not your God. It's not a sort of personal being that you refer to, from the Abrahamic traditions. No, but there may be some sort of power, some sort of energy that's, something like that explains everything, right? So there is a subtle difference that we can appreciate between atheism and naturalism. However, like I said, and something that's acknowledged by Richard Dawkins himself, most atheists are naturalists, or most self-proclaimed atheists, that is. Although on the ground, when you speak to most atheists in public, you wouldn't even call them atheists when you really get to know their position. Nevertheless, for the sake of what we're discussing here, we're going to assume naturalism as the default position, and atheism and naturalism I'm going to use interchangeably here on going forward. So that's the main difference between the two. So what are the implications of atheism and naturalism? What are the implications of a world which, generally speaking, pushes the idea that there is no God, there is no creator, there is no hereafter? You are born, you live and you die. What are the implications of such a world? Now, something I want us to appreciate here. As soon as you say there is no creator, there is no God, essentially what you're acknowledging without saying this is that everything in existence is a result of just blind, cold, physical processes. It's all random. Everything that exists today, including ourselves, are just a result of one big random accident. Everything is an accident. There is no creator, there is no God, there is no being that intended all of this, that brought all of this into being. It just happened. It's all one big accident. That's what you're acknowledging by saying that there is no God, there is no creator. Okay? This is what most atheists and in particular naturalists will acknowledge. Now, as soon as you say this or you believe this, well, then that means everything is an accident, and therefore if everything is an accident, there is no ultimate meaning, there is no ultimate purpose. Nothing means nothing anymore, pretty much. It's just all pointless, it's all random. Okay? And therefore we can ask these questions now, and if we logically follow through, and if we try to take the atheist or the naturalist on a journey here and ask them, well, okay, if that's the case, well, where is the ultimate hope on your worldview? And when we talk about hope, we're referring to the feeling or expectation and desire for something to happen, in particular something good to happen, right? Where is the hope? Now think about the scenario of someone that's sick on their deathbed. Where is the hope, that they would maybe move on to somewhere better, that the pain and the sickness and the tribulation they're going through will be over? Where is the hope for that person? Where is the hope for a person who's had a life full of suffering, that there's something better to come? Where's the hope for a person who's had a life full of joy, that they're going to move on and that joy is going to continue? Where is this hope for something better to happen on a worldview which tells you life is an accident, everything is an accident, occurrences are an accident, the future too will be an accident, right? It's just a chain of accidents, just this lengthy chain of accidents which has been taking place. Where is the ultimate hope for such a person? Now, someone may turn around and say, well, I hope that I'm going to die and then the pain is over, but okay, the pain is over, but you're no longer there to experience what comes after, because according to them, you are no more. You are your physical body, you are your physical being, and when that's over, it's over, lights out, right? So there is no hope that you're going to experience anything other than what you're experiencing up until the moment you die. So there is no ultimate hope. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, certainly no one despairs of Allah's mercy except the people who disbelieve. They have nothing to look forward to. And what's very interesting, just thinking about it now, human beings, we're beings that have the ability to project into the future, our minds. So we have the ability to see into the future, to plan for the future, right? This is something that's unique to us human beings. We can sit there and we can peer into the future, not literally, but just in our mind's eyes, and we could plan therefore for the future, and hence we have goals and we set ourselves challenges to achieve things for the future. But on atheism and naturalism, where is the ultimate hope? Whenever you peer into the future, what do you have to look forward to? Nothing at the end of the day, literally nothing. So there is no ultimate hope on atheism or naturalism. Where is the ultimate justice on atheism and naturalism? Now look, this is a very interesting point, brothers and sisters. Something atheists and naturalists acknowledge alongside us as theists, in particular Muslims, is, well, life is unfair. Life is unfair. We live in a world which is not perfect. I'm gonna quantify what I'm saying in a second. But we live in a world where things aren't all good. We live in a world where there isn't justice all the time. We live in a world where sometimes you do really good things, but you still end up getting something really bad, or something really bad happens. We live in a world where someone is really bad, but still good things happen to them, and you think, what's going on, right? There is this what some will call the irrational aspects of reality, just because they don't have the fundamental understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with in the Quran, knowledge which really helps us understand reality, puts things into perspective. But generally, if we look at the world and just see it, and what's very interesting is that you can look at the world in two levels. On one level, there is great order. You look at the laws of the universe, you look at mathematical laws of the universe, you look at the fine-tuning of the universe. There is order within the universe. It's precise. You know, there's fine-tuning. There's something that even Dawkins has to acknowledge and say, well, it looks designed. There are constants and quantities which are precisely fine-tuned in this universe. And us Muslims, we can look at this and we can say, subhanAllah, these are the signs of Allah. But on another level, on a human, you know, day-to-day life level, if you like, where we're engaging with people in society and we're living our lives, there is a lot of disorder. You know, where things go wrong, bad things happen, we suffer, we go through pain, hardships. You know, for the non-Muslim, for the atheists, they can't make, well, number one, they can't make sense of these realities. For one, they can't make sense of the order because they have to deny it because they don't believe in God, and they have to come to some really irrational conclusions because they deny it. And number two, they can't make sense of this disorder within this realm where we know where there are bad things that happen. You know, but from their perspective, another thing to look at is, well, there's no ultimate justice because it all ends at the grave, and in this life there is no ultimate justice, right? So you know, it's a very bleak outlook. But from the Islamic perspective, what do we know? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qa'iman bil qist, as he says in Surah Al-Imran, in the 18th ayah, I think, that he's firm, he's established upon his justice. And therefore we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ultimate justice is going to take place. Everything will be equalized in the day of judgment, right? So at the end of the day, because it doesn't end at the grave, everything is going to be equalized. Ultimate justice is going to be established and take place. You know, no one's going to be wronged in the slightest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts everything into perspective. So we, therefore, we can acknowledge ultimate justice because we know, we believe in a creator who is ultimately just. He is the just. He is established upon justice, and ultimate justice will take place. And he also informs us out of his mercy as to why these things happen in this life, why there is this aspect of reality which seems disordered. You know, there's suffering and there's pain and there's hardships, because life is a test. We're going to be tested. We're going to go through hardships. We're going to go through trials and tribulations. So Islam comprehensively accounts for all of this and provides a comprehensive answer and accounts for ultimate justice and informs humanity that ultimate justice will take place. You know, don't judge that based on this temporary life, because there is an objective behind this life, which is for you to be tested. So don't worry, ultimate justice is inevitably going to be established. From an atheist perspective, there is no ultimate justice. There's nothing. No ultimate value. You know, this is one I really like. This is one of my favorite examples. There's no ultimate value in atheism or naturalism. Remember, everything is an accident. Therefore, you are an accident, right? Everything is just matter in motion. You and me, we are just an arrangement of matter and carbon, just atoms and molecules which have just formed in a particular way, which forms us and what we see as human beings. Therefore, really, if we think about it, on atheism and naturalism, there is no difference between me and the table, or you and the computer screen that you're looking at right now. You are an arrangement of atoms and molecules. The computer screen you're looking at right now is an arrangement of atoms and molecules. There's literally no difference on atheism or naturalism. There is nothing that distinguishes you from anything else around you. There's nothing that makes you more special than anything else around you. That's the reality on atheism and naturalism. You know, and this is why we always present an example. You know, and the example Hamza gives in the Divine Reality in his book is of the chocolate bunny. It's a really very interesting example. Look, you know, imagine, and I'll paint this scenario for you guys right now. Imagine you suffer from a condition whereby you have this anger problem, and you've gone to your doctor, and your doctor's told you there's no medication for your issue or your problem. All you can do is, you can carry a hammer around with you. And whenever you get angry, just release your anger on something, go smash something, and you'll feel better. So you always keep a hammer with you. Now imagine for some reason you get really angry. You know, imagine and right now we're not online, we're in a class somewhere, we're sitting together and I'm right in front of you. Imagine for some reason you get really angry with me, right? And you know, you're triggered and you need to release your anger. And you have a choice. You can either smash me or you can smash a chocolate bunny that's sitting on the table next to me. What would you smash? Who would you smash? And I want you to think about this from the atheist mindset. Put yourself in the shoes of a naturalist or an atheist. What would you smash in that scenario? Me or the chocolate bunny? Every sane human being would say the chocolate bunny. It just makes sense. It's intuitive and it's rational. But if I was to ask you why, you would turn around and probably say, well, it's obvious you're a human being and that's a chocolate bunny. But if I was to press a bit further and ask you, well, hold on a second, what does that mean? What distinguishes me as a human being from that chocolate bunny? Or you would say, well, you're more complex, you're sentient, you're conscious, you are alive, you're human, but that chocolate bunny is just chocolate. I'll say, okay, that's interesting, but what does that mean on atheism and naturalism? What does it mean when you say that I'm more complex, therefore I'm more valuable than that chocolate bunny? Why? Because what you're essentially doing here is you're inserting in a principle, an idea, which is that complex things are better or more valuable than less complex things. Where did you get this idea from, and why does that have any value in and of itself? On atheism or naturalism, in a worldview where everything is just random and an accident, then you may say, well, okay, forget complexity, you're conscious. Well, hold on a second. On atheism and naturalism, what does it mean to be conscious? According to naturalists, or at least most of them, your consciousness is just an illusion of your physical material brain. So there's nothing special there. There's nothing extra there. It's just your brain, which is matter. Therefore, saying you're conscious means really nothing. What does that mean? You're not distinguishing yourself from that chocolate bunny. Then you may turn around and say, well, I don't know, you feel, you're sentient. Okay, that's another principle you're injecting there, which is a being that feels is more valuable than a being that doesn't feel. Well, why does that hold any value, that idea? Then you may say, well, I feel pain, or you will feel pain, and you will be, pain is not good. Okay, that's interesting. I agree with you, but on atheism and naturalism, why is feeling pain really a bad thing? And where is that ethical or moral ought that's pressing down on you when you say that coming from? Where is that ethical ought that's pressing down on you, that moral ought that you don't want me to feel pain because that's something not good? Where is that coming from on atheism or naturalism? Ethics and morals in and of themselves are just subjective whims of the human being based on either social constructs or evolution or whatever else they may be. So at the end of the day, whichever way you play or look at it, at the end of the day on atheism and naturalism, there is literally no difference between you as a human being and any other inanimate object. Your phone, your table, your chair, a can of Pepsi, I don't know, a book. There's no difference, literally no difference. And the irony, brothers and sisters and friends, the irony, atheists claim to be humanists. Many secular humanists claim to be atheists, outspoken atheists. Well, how do you now, literally these are contradictory views if you really sit down and knuckle down and really look at what's being said there. So there is no ultimate value on atheism and naturalism. Therefore, you're almost, and we can start to see the pictures building now. You are degrading, and I'm using my words very carefully here. You are as soon as you adopt atheism and naturalism, you are degrading yourself and your worth as a human being. You're reducing yourself to something less than what God has made you as a human being, because you can't help but do that. Your worldview pushes you to that position, and that's one of the sad realities of atheism and naturalism. Moving on, no ultimate purpose. I mean, again, accidents don't have a purpose, at least from their perspective. You spill milk, it's spilt milk. That's it. There's no purpose behind it. It happened. That's pretty much it. Your life is an accident. Everything is an accident. Then where is the purpose? Where is the ultimate purpose? There isn't any. Atheist Veteran said, well, I have purpose. My purpose is to do X or Y or Z. Well, that's something you're making up. And again, we'll explore this a bit later when we look at some of the responses. But there is no ultimate purpose on atheism or naturalism. Whatever they say, whatever they come up with, whatever they push, I want to be a philosopher. I want to be a philanthropist. I want to do charity work. I want to set up an orphan for children. Okay, these are beautiful things, but on atheism and naturalism, you doing all of these things means nothing. This is purpose you're ascribing to yourself. You're making it up. Like children, kids, they play dress up sometimes, and they act like Batman or Superman or Robin. That's essentially what they're doing. It's like playing dress up. Oh, I don't have any purpose or meaning to my life. I'm just going to make up purpose for myself. And that's the absurdities. It may work for some, but it's not going to work for many. But we'll explore this a bit more as we go along. No ultimate happiness. This is a big one as well, because human beings chase happiness. We want to be happy. You know the why game kids play. Why? You answer a question, they say why. If you speak to people and ask them, well, okay, what do you want to do in life? I want to be a doctor. Why? Because I want to help people and get lots of money. Why? Because it's a good thing to do. Why? Because you're taking care of others. Why? Well, I want to take care of others. Why? Because it's going to make me feel good and I'm going to be happy. At the end of the day, if you play that why game with most people, inevitably in most cases they will end up with, because I want to be happy. Human beings want to be happy, right? But on atheism and naturalism, there's no ultimate happiness. How can there be when you don't know why you're here? When you don't know why you're here, brothers and sisters, friends, we're purpose-driven creatures. Every aspect of our life is purpose-driven. Literally, like we wake up in the morning with a purpose. Every level of our lives is purpose-driven. We brush our teeth and have our breakfast and leave our houses and go to work with a purpose. We come home, we have dinner, we go to bed with a purpose. We go to the toilet with a purpose. We wear shoes with a purpose. We have a bath with a purpose. It's all purpose-driven. When we look at the world around us, we see it with the eye of purpose. We ascribe purpose to things around us. When we make things and design things, we design and make things with a purpose. We're purpose-driven creatures. We can't escape this. But when it comes to our very existence, our very being, our reason for living, there is no ultimate purpose. There's nothing. How does that make sense? How is that going to sit well with one's nature, with one's fitrah? Start to think about that. I'm just planting the seed right now, but really think about that. And this has caused a lot of problems because it just doesn't make any sense. Everything around me has a purpose. I see that. I have the ability to see and appreciate that. And I have the ability to ask the question about my very existence and the purpose of my very existence. But there's no answers from the worldview of atheism and naturalism. There is no ultimate purpose or meaning. How is that going to feel? I can tell you from my personal story, I spent many years before I came back to Islam dealing with this very issue. I didn't know who I was anymore. I just didn't have the reason to get out of bed in the morning and brush my teeth. Why, when I'm going to end up under the ground dead? Why was I alive? Why was I conscious? Why could I see and understand the world around me? Why could I reflect about it? Why could I think about the future? These were things that really got to me and they were hurting me for many, many years. I just couldn't, just everything around me just blanked out at a point. The world around me didn't seem real anymore. And I'm thinking about it now, it didn't seem real. I disassociated with the world around me because I couldn't see value in it or the meaning behind it. I disassociated from myself. I would look at myself in the mirror, I would look down at my hands and I couldn't recognize myself anymore. What was I? Who was I? And then I dissociated from it. I didn't feel real because I couldn't understand the meaning behind my existence. If there wasn't any meaning, well, it's probably not even real. And it caused me huge issues. And many people suffer from this type of existential angst, this absurd, the awareness of the absurd. Albert Camus, an existential philosopher, he writes this in one of his books. I think Sisyphus, I think it's called, if I can't remember. I read this and it really struck me. He really paints this in a very beautiful prose. He speaks about when man or woman first comes into contact with the absurd. They go through that door and they realize that on that worldview without God, and this is something I'm injecting in there because he doesn't say that, but as soon as you turn away from God and God-given meaning and the reality God reveals to you, as soon as you walk through that door and really ask the question about what does life mean and what does my existence mean, there are no answers. It's just darkness, and he speaks about the absurd. It's like everything loses meaning. It's removed, it's sucked out from the world around you. But at the same time, he says, and this is very interesting, he mentions that there is a fascination. There is this desire in the person that he can't focus on anything other than that absurd, because this is yearning inside the person to figure things out. And I think one thing he did, what he was referring to there was the fitrah of man, the nature of man that Allah has created us upon. And he's given us certain tools within us to look and to understand and to seek out Allah. Because a part of the fitrah is to recognize Allah and to worship Allah. And when human beings are disconnected from this reality, they're gonna end up in turmoil. They're gonna have existential issues, psychological issues. They're gonna go through depression and anxiety, at least some forms of depression and anxiety. So there is no ultimate happiness, because if you don't have the answers to the fundamental questions of life, who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you going? Things that are pressing upon us as human beings. How can you ultimately be happy? Imagine the example of right now, for some reason, you guys get really bored and you feel really sleepy and you fall asleep. you just knock out. And then suddenly you wake up, but you're not in your room anymore. Imagine you're on a train and the train is just moving really fast, and you look out the window, you're on a track there, you see, you don't know how you got on the train. What's your initial feeling? How do you feel initially? What's your reaction? There's going to be anxiety. There's going to be worry. There's going to be questions that are racing through your mind. How did I get here? Who put me here? Where is this going? What the hell's going on? And then you look out the window, and although you're worried about all of these things, suddenly you see the most beautiful scenery, the sun setting over the mountains, right? And suddenly there's a sense of appreciation you have of the beauty you see outside the window. And then as soon as you turn back around, you realize that there's beautiful music or nasheeds that are playing in the train, soothing nasheeds. And then suddenly someone brings a 5-star meal to you and puts the meal right in front of you. And you taste the food, and it's the most delicious food that you've ever tasted. And at the same time, you start to notice the comfort of the chair that you're sitting in. It's the most comfortable chair you've ever been sitting in. Now, as you're enjoying these pleasures that you're picking up through your senses, ask yourself the question, although you may be temporarily distracted and may experience a sense of joy at the things that you're experiencing via your senses, are you truly happy in any meaningful sense without getting the answers to those fundamental questions that you had? How did I come here? Where is this train going? Who put me here? The answer is no. In most cases, in practicality, I mean, if you ended up in such a situation, you probably flick the tray and you just get up and start running, right? You wouldn't know what you would start screaming, right? And this analogy applies to life in a very beautiful way, because we live in a world where, which is so disconnected from God, that we're born and we're in this world and we're looking at the world around us, we're enjoying certain aspects of reality. We enjoy certain things, and and trust me, there's a lot in this world to enjoy. They've decked it out, it's been kitted out, it's been beautified for you to just focus on and just lose yourself in, right? And the more you focus on this world, but at the same time, you may be deriving temporary pleasure from the things around you, but are you truly happy without knowing who you are? What's your purpose? Who created you? Who put you here? Where are you going? Are you going to be truly happy? No, you'll never be truly happy. You may be distracted, but you'll never truly be happy. And in atheism and naturalism, there is no ultimate happiness or meaning. So let's quickly think about this idea and go back to the period of Enlightenment and one of the underlying the mission statements, which was progress from a worldly sense, to progress and to create a worldly utopia. Did they achieve that? No. This is something that the postmodernists have recognized, and hence you had this postmodernist movement, which was, just completely exposing modernism from that perspective. Okay, so they didn't achieve that in any way, shape, or form. If anything, by turning away from God, sure, this helped propel the industrial revolution and helped, develop amenities and luxuries, at least for some aspects of the world or some parts of the world, while it sort of sucked the life out of other parts of the world and other human beings in other poorer parts of the world. Overall, it was a failed project, right? And this highlights to us, as soon as man is created to worship God, as soon as you disconnect human beings from its creator and you try to sell them another vision, you're going to fail. You're going to run into problems. It's not going to work, at least not for long. And this is exactly what we saw take place in the in the 19th and the 20th century, or 19th and early parts of the 20th century. Like we said already, World War I, World War II, socialism, capitalism. I mean, think about the Soviet Union, the atrocities, the way people were killed just because of their religious views, the way they were pushed to turn away from religion and God, massacres at the hands of Stalin. Think about World War I and World War II. How many deaths took place during these battles of war? Colonialism itself is a direct result of this modernist mentality, because it's all about the world. It's all about pushing, as much as you can to try and make just make as much as you can of this material world. And for that, you need resources. And for you to need resources, well, the Western world, most of the world that was pushing these ideas didn't have much in the form of resources. Well, you have to get them from somewhere, right? So you exploit other parts of the world. So it was a failed project, and this is why I said this was one of the things you can give some credential or some props to postmodernism for, that they just call these things out. It was a failed project, and this is something interesting, because if you look at it from the perspective of many atheists and those that are anti-theists, they always make the argument, well, religions cause deaths, religions cause corruption, religions have resulted in so many massacres and etc. etc. But when you look at it's not a numbers game. I don't like playing a numbers game with atheists when they make this type of argument. But if you were to play the numbers game, I mean, if you look at the findings, you will see that the truth is something else. I mean, a very interesting analysis is given in a book, War and Peace in Islam. The results, if you look at them, and they conduct these, over the studies, and they have all of this data in their book and all the tables and graphs, but they conclude by saying our findings show that using the entire data set from the period 0 to 2008, politically and religiously motivated violence has cost between 447.86 million and 706.72 million lives. The Christian civilization shares of this is the largest, with between 119.42 million and 236.66 million victims. Median, 178.72 million. In second place is the anti-theist civilization, which has contributed with a median figure of 124.41 million deaths. Sixth is, and I removed some of what was said there just to get to the point. Sixth is the Islamic civilization with 31.02 million deaths. So look, at the end of the day, human beings are human beings. Whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, human beings sometimes have throughout history and will continue to make mistakes. War is a part of the human condition. No one's perfect. Sure, some aspects of people that associate with Islam have led to many atrocities in the world that have done some absolutely disgusting and terrible things, and we're the first to speak out against them. But if you're going to play a numbers game, if you look at the anti-theists, the death toll from the perspective of anti-theism is far higher than that of Islam, right? And again, we could see why. If you just think about this from just a purely logical perspective, well, look at what's going on. We've seen the implications of a world that turns away from God, and that's exactly what happens. You turn people away from God, you remove the foundations of humanity, and therefore, when you get man to focus on the world, then it just becomes a selfish rat race. The nafs is just going wild, and it just wants to achieve as much as it can. There is nothing grounding the human being anymore. Right, so anything goes. You can justify pretty much anything, and we've seen some of the atrocities throughout history from this perspective. And there is a beautiful ayah in the Quran, which I think relates to this and gives us some insights into this. Where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says in the 30th chapter, verse 41, corruption has spread on land and sea as a result of what people's hands have done, so that Allah may cause them to taste the consequences of some of the deeds, and perhaps they may return to the right path. I mean, we don't need to go into the exegesis or even a pondering of this ayah. I mean, the ayah speaks for itself, right? I mean, right now, we're going through literally a heat wave in the UK. The past couple of days have just been hot. And obviously, if most of you guys are from the UK, you know how hot it's been, especially in London and areas around London. It's just been crazy. It's hard to sleep at night. Why is this happening? It's a result of global warming. Well, we know why global warming is taking place, right? So we can see how turning away from Allah has resulted in just the destruction of our planet, the destruction of human beings, the destruction of the individual on every level. And this should be a sign for humanity, if anything. It should be a big sign for all of us. This was something that Nietzsche predicted. I'm not going to go into this too much, but sometimes, some of the atheists like to take Nietzsche's quote out of context, when he said God is dead. Nietzsche is a very interesting thinker, because I think it was I watched a YouTube lecture by Professor Ken James, I think it was, and he mentioned this, and he goes into explaining this statement of Nietzsche's, which he made, where he said, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world had yet owned had bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent?" Most atheists use this as saying, "Oh, look, Nietzsche was a champion of atheism." Sure, there's much we can disagree with him about, right? But something he saw was that as soon as people turn away from God and have killed God, as far as turning away from God and denying God, he saw the problems. He predicted the next couple of centuries that they were going to be centuries of nihilism, meaninglessness. because he saw the logical implications of turning away from God. Obviously, during the period of Enlightenment, the thinkers tried to patch this the best they could by selling humanity another vision, a worldly vision. But obviously, it was going to fall through at some point, and it did. So it was very interesting, his insights. I just wanted to clarify that, because sometimes what Nietzsche said in regards to God is dead is taken out of context. And he basically was saying, he was reminding people, look, you killed God. How are you going to deal with the outcomes? What are you going to do? How are you going to now remedy this situation we find ourselves in? And he obviously didn't see a solution on such an outlook where you don't believe in a creator. So proposed solutions by the existentialists and atheists. Now, obviously, it's a problem. Existential nihilism, which I'm specifically focusing on. Let me just define that term quickly, because I haven't done it already. Nihilism or nihilism is the idea, generally speaking, that of meaninglessness. Nothing has any meaning. But when we say existential nihilism or nihilism, what we're saying here specifically is there is no meaning from the perspective of our existence, our lives, our existence has no meaning. And that's what I'm specifically focusing on in this webinar, although we know atheism and naturalism and other such ideologies lead to nihilism as a general idea, which is meaning is removed from all perspectives, from ethics, morals, etc. So how they tried to resolve this, remedy this? One of the ways was they said, well, let's make up meaning and be responsible. This was something Jean-Paul Sartre pushed himself, which was the idea of living responsible lives. And he wrote hugely on being responsible, again, just to remedy, provide a solution for human beings that find themselves in a world without God. His idea was that, look, we have to give ourselves meaning. We have to live with meaning. We have to and live responsibly. Although I don't know how he accounted for a responsible life. He was an atheist himself. And again, like we said, if there's no meaning to life, if everything is an accident, well, what does it mean to be responsible? What does it mean to live responsibly? What does it mean to live in a way where you're looking out for other human beings? Well, these are questions in and of themselves. This wasn't going to work, because essentially, when you say, I'm going to give myself meaning, my meaning or my purpose is to be X, Y, or Z, like we said already, you're making up meaning. You're making up meaning for yourself. In other words, you're lying to yourselves. This is not your ultimate purpose. You're just making something up. And what does that mean? What does it mean to make up something for yourselves just to get by? And why should that get you by? I mean, if you really know what's going on here, that shouldn't work for you. So that's one option which fails. Another perspective is, let's just accept it and face it. This is something Richard Dawkins I've heard pushing recently, which is, look, we have to be brave, and religious people are afraid and they're not brave, and that's why they make up religion, because religion provides comfort. Religion is comforting, and that's why people have made up religion. Now, just a quick thought on this idea of religion is comforting, therefore people have made up religion. That doesn't logically follow. Just because something provides comfort, it doesn't mean it's automatically made up for that very reason. I mean, if I could think, I don't know, but as an analogy, it's like saying, I don't know, it's probably not a good analogy, but it's like saying water quenches thirst, therefore water was manufactured or created or exists for that reason. No, well, that's one reason, but that doesn't mean water is only for that reason. So, I mean, the point I'm getting at here is, just because something provides comfort, it doesn't mean it's made up. Another way of looking at it is this, that the creator that gave you this religion knows your nature, knows what's going to provide you comfort and get you through this life, and therefore he gave you a religion which caters towards that. That's equally as plausible. So I don't get that type of argument. It doesn't logically follow. So this whole idea about let's just accept it and face it, okay, that's one way you can deal with it. And to be honest, that's probably that's you being most honest as an atheist or a naturalist, by saying, okay, there is no ultimate meaning and purpose to life. I'm not going to act like there is or make something up. I'm just going to face it and keep going. If that works for you, all power to you. But to be honest, with most people, it's just not going to sit well with their nature, because they're going to be in a constant state of agitation. Because the human nature we know deep down inside we have a purpose. There is the reason we're here, and we're looking for it. And Allah has placed the fundamental building blocks of that within our very fitra, within our very nature. But at the same time, worldviews such as atheism and naturalism are completely rejecting that nature. So you're always going to be in a state of agitation, and it's not going to work for most people, I would say. And even if it does, if people just deal with it for a while, eventually they'll fall off. And this is why you know, people like Jordan Peterson. I really believe people like Jordan Peterson, you know, some of his stuff is really, really good, you know, amazing. But the reason he's gaining so much popularity, brothers and sisters and friends, I really believe one of the reasons is because what he's doing is he's speaking about meaning and purpose and value. And he's giving people something atheism and naturalism is not giving people. So he's providing something to people on such worldviews who come from such a worldview, something to incline towards. And because what he's saying is more in line with people's nature, they're inclining towards him more and they're following people like him more. Right? It's very interesting. And this is why it's a beautiful opportunity for us as Muslims today to share the message of Islam, because it's far more comprehensive than what Jordan Peterson or anyone else is providing. Right? So we've got the solution. The postmodernist response, the way they deal with this is, well, they say there is no meaning. You know, we'll define things the way we want to define, everything subjective anyway. And they're trying to, again, like with the first point, they're trying to just come to terms with all of this. And what they're doing is they just, you know, they're saying, okay, well, it seems to be what's going on here. The thinking is, well, look, okay, how do we deal with meaninglessness? We have amazing technology that we've developed due to the advent of, you know, due to the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. It's led to some amazing technological advancements, which it has, you know. Let's just make the most of that. Let's just lose ourselves in technology, right? How many people do we see today? The gaming culture, which is so prevalent. People are losing themselves in games. They live through the game. They live by the rules of the game. They live literally by the rules of the game, right? They define themselves by the game. They feel a sense of honor through the game and how other characters in the game recognize them. This is why games like Fortnite and games like PUBG are so popular, because there's an element of there being levels. You know, there's an element where you have to work. There's a purpose in the game and it's defined. And at the same time, you can live by purpose vicariously through the game, and at the same time disassociate with your real life. So you don't have to live in a responsible way. It's very interesting what's going on. People are losing themselves in these games, so much so that when they're told not to play these games, we've seen some crazy things. For example, PUBG, I believe, was banned recently in Pakistan. And one of the reasons it was banned, because there was 2 recent deaths associated with the game, where some, I think 2 youth or young Muslims, obviously Muslims, I hope, they were playing the game and their parents told them not to play the game, and they killed themselves. And this is not the first. There was cases in India over the past couple of years where apparently a guy beheaded his father because he didn't buy him a phone. I don't know how true these stories are, but if there's any truth to these stories, it's worrying. And we know there is, because there's so many such cases. A guy killed his father because he didn't buy him a phone that was powerful enough to run the game. It's madness when you think about it. You know, and we've probably seen this issue within our own families, within our own circles. You know, people are spending more time on these games and on these social media. Social media platforms are another avenue where people are completely losing themselves. You know, one of the biggest crackpot social media platforms is TikTok. I mean, some of the brothers I know have been showing me some like videos on it, and I just think, what are people doing? It's just madness. Like people are, and the scary thing is, brothers and sisters, is Muslims on there who are putting out Muslim content and making a mockery of Islam. Literally, they're defining certain narrations and certain hadith and certain Quranic ayat in a comical way and making videos on it, just removing the severity and the seriousness of what's being said, and therefore ultimately removing the meaning. And it's worrying, because it also shows how this postmodern mindset has influenced us Muslims too, because anything goes. You define things the way you want. How many times do we see Muslims trying to define Islam in a way they want to define it, you know, wanting to reform Islam, when the irony is they don't realize that Islam indeed is the solution to all of these issues. Islam has the solutions to the problems that are created by modernism and postmodernism. Well, but they want to define it according to the paradigm that they find themselves in. It's because they're not educated on these points, and it's very important we understand the world that we live in and what's going on, so we can save ourselves and our families from this too, inshallah. And also makes for effective da'wah to non-Muslims, because we know what's going on. So we see the sort of the postmodernist response, or at least generally speaking, even the response of people today to escape meaninglessness through gaming, through technology, and it's crazy. You know, it's absolute madness. Another way is they say, let's focus on the meaning of life, or the meaning in life as opposed to the meaning of life. This is another interesting one. This is something that the philosophers are discussing. I read this recently in one of the books where there's a discussion. Okay, when it comes to the meaning of life and our existence, what should we focus on? Should we focus on what's the meaning of life, or should we focus on what's the meaning in life? And most of the philosophers are inclining towards, especially those that take the that you would consider the more naturalist, existential type philosophers who are dealing with these issues, they lean more towards, let's discuss the meaning in life. And it's interesting, and I can see why, because it's easier to think of it in the way that, okay, we're here now, we have to live, let's just give us what's the meaning in life, what could we give us meaning to, what meaning could we give our lives, which allow us to live a life which is fruitful. It goes back and ties in with the initial point, which is let's make meaning up for ourselves. But that's what they're inclining towards, and they're not really dealing with what's the meaning of life, because, well, from a worldview, from the perspective of godlessness, there is no meaning, and there's no way around this. Another way is let's live according to our biology. This is something that's interesting, because I would expect Richard Dawkins to ascribe to this view, because he's a biologist. He pushes evolution a lot. I would expect him to say, well, look, the meaning of life is to do what our genes want us to do, which is to procreate and pass on our DNA. So that's what you expect Dawkins to say, but he doesn't say that. What's interesting, in a recent podcast, I heard him say, well, the meaning of life should be to propagate our DNA, but I don't think that's what, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines of, I don't think that's what the meaning of my life is. I think my meaning of my life is something else. And I was just shocked when he said this. Well, how are you going to now account for that meaning that you think the meaning of your life is, as opposed to what your biology tells you the meaning of your life is, right? So even someone like Dawkins, and it shows you the contradiction in their worldview. It shows you that the fitrah is screaming out, but at the same time, they're adopting a worldview which doesn't recognize the fitrah and doesn't recognize the nature of man. Some would say pleasure is the key. The meaning of life is to enjoy life. That's it. Well, this is just a statement. Okay, you enjoy things and it feels good, but just because something feels good, and as we mentioned already, just because something feels good, how does that now become the meaning of your life? You're just telling yourself, well, that's the meaning of my life because it feels good. That in itself is meaningless. Again, it's just an idea you're positing which has no intrinsic meaning in and of itself. Camus, for example, he said that the meaning of life is whatever keeps you alive. Again, I could see, you could see the desperation in that statement in and of itself, So those are some of the proposed solutions, and hopefully we've seen why they fail. And the problem here is, firstly, if there's no meaning, there's no progress. And this is the thing, the whole idea of modernism and particular modernism, not postmodernism, the whole idea of progress in this world is undermined when you turn away from God. Because when you turn away from God, there is no meaning or purpose, as we've seen. There is no drive that's going to push you to go now and progress in this world, to go and achieve things in this world. It's all meaningless. You start floating in the void of meaninglessness. You just sink into this black hole. It's contradictory. The whole outlook's contradictory, right? So another thing is, it leads to types of depression and anxiety. And this is an interesting point, because, okay, even if life is meaningless, why should that be a problem? Why should that feel uncomfortable? Why should we feel pain and anxiety and agitation at the idea that life is meaningless? Why should we not be satisfied with that and just go and procreate and pass on our DNA? Why? If that's all we're here to do, why is it there's agitation? Why is it that we go and search for meaning and purpose? These are signs which point us, or at least get us to hopefully recognize that there is more to our existence than just our biology, just passing on genes and propagating our DNA, right? Arguing from utility, the fact that thinking of the world is as meaningless is problematic on so many levels is a sign that whatever worldview leads to such a conclusion is incorrect, or at the very least unhelpful. And this ties in with the point that I've made. If recognizing life is meaningless, life is pointless, there is no ultimate meaning or purpose to life, leads to such problems, anxiety, what the philosophers call the absurd, existential angst, pain, depression, anxiety, if it leads to such conditions, then that should be a sign for us that worldview, which is putting us in the position which leads us to the conclusion that gives us such pain and anxiety, must be incorrect. it has no utility for us as human beings, right? So we could just purely argue from utility and just highlight to people that, look, maybe you need to look elsewhere, right? Atheism and naturalism is not cutting the mustard, and some people are naturally waking up to this reality. Hence, like I said already, they're turning away from people like Dawkins and that Sam Harris is very clever, because unlike Dawkins, Sam Harris is trying to provide an alternative. He realizes people are waking up. Hence, he's written a book on waking up, and he has a app which helps people with spirituality on atheism. God knows whatever that means, right? So people are turning away from these people and inclining more towards people like Jordan Peterson and so on and so forth. So some things for us to reflect upon, inshallah. And at the end of the day, brothers and sisters, I think this particular ayah of the Quran, in a very profound and very unique way, encapsulates everything. And by the way, coming to the end, so we're not going to go on too long, inshallah. I know we're reaching the hour mark. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. This ayah is profound, brothers and sisters. This ayah of the Quran is the ayah that, for example, Iqbal, his entire philosophy was based on this particular ayah. This ayah, I think, for me, if you want to understand the tafsir of this ayah, just look at the history of the world over the past couple of hundred years. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly told us here, and do not be like those who turn away from Allah, who forget Allah. And Allah made them forget themselves. Those are the ones who have transgressed all bounds. And what's very interesting is another interesting nuance point here, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ. Nasiya here, the noon seen ya here, that this particular word doesn't just mean forgetting out of just forgetting, just being forgetting by accidentally, like it's not your choice, but it specifically refers to forgetting intentionally. It's to force oneself to turn away. It's to pretend to forget. If you read Lane's lexicon and the explanation he gives in regards to this particular word, it says there, it's to pretend to forget, to put yourself in a position where you deliberately turn away from something and you forcefully try to forget that thing. And as subhanAllah, this lets us in on the understanding that, look, when people turn away from Allah, they're turning away from their very nature. And then their fitrah recognizes Allah. It's not something you're just going to forget, and it's that easy. You have to force yourself to turn away from Allah. And this further leads on to the idea that atheism is not a natural position, it's an acquired position. Something we'll probably touch upon in the webinar on the fitrah in much more detail. But I thought it was very interesting. So Allah is saying, and do not be like those who deliberately turn away from Allah, deliberately forgot Allah, and Allah made them forget themselves. What have we seen in this webinar so far? That humanity deliberately decided to turn away from God. And in doing so, they literally lost their own bearings. They completely lost their bearings. They were completely thrown out of balance, and we saw the results of that. We are seeing the results of that on a social perspective, on every perspective, on an individual perspective, such as no meaning, no happiness, no value, no justice. It's all removed. You literally are put in a position where you're forced to forget yourself. You recognize certain things are true, but you can't account for them. Certain things are part of your very being that makes you a human being, but you can't account for them on atheism or naturalism. What a sad position to put atheism and naturalism puts you in. How it degrades the human being. So Islam as the solution. We're going to quickly wrap up on this. So we're heading towards the tipping point. People are starting to wake up, something we appreciate already. Islam provides a comprehensive account for life. The entire message of the Quran revolves around a core theme, which is the purpose of our existence. The Quran answers the fundamental question we're in search of as a human race. What is my purpose? Why am I here? Who am I? The entire Quran revolves around the core theme, which is where Allah tells us that He did not create us except to worship Him. Allah did not create us for any other reason except to worship Him. And we really understand this, brothers and sisters. This is, in other words, when Allah says He did not create the jinn kind and mankind for no other reason except to worship Him, here Allah is telling us the purpose of our existence, that very purpose we're in search of. And in other words, therefore, the entire Quran is revolving around this fundamental theme, this fundamental question the human being has. And what else would you expect from revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most merciful? To answer and provide answers to the most fundamental questions we have as human beings, right? something you would expect, again, something you'd expect from the Creator to inform us of. Islam provides a meaningful life, one which brings the perfect balance to humanity, right? Now, this is something, again, something that Christianity didn't get right. You know, the Christianity in Europe, it resulted in the world that we find ourselves in today. It pushed the people, because of the persecution, because of the irrational ideas of the Trinity and reincarnation and all of these ideas which were averse to reason, because of all the persecution of the thinkers and the early scientists, it pushed people towards coming up with the ideas and the philosophies which have ended up in the atheistic world that we live in today, this anti-theist world that we're a part of today, generally speaking. So in other words, you can say, or you can argue, Christianity to a great extent led to a godless world that we are a part of today. You know, and that's a very it's a very difficult thing to swallow, because Christianity, you know, is a religion which claims to believe and follow or to worship God. And it's unfortunate, because we know the Christianity that we have in the world today is not what was given to Isa alayhi salam. And if they had remained upon that truth, and Allah knows best, you know, this wouldn't have happened. But anyway, the concept of God is intuitive, firstly, the fitra, and rational. And this was the thing. So this is why I said I really believe the early thinkers of the Enlightenment period may have even become Muslim if they had come across Islam, because the message of Islam, where Allah tells us about himself, where he says that he is uniquely one, Qul huwallahu ahad, he's uniquely one, this would have resonated with the thinkers of the time. Where Allah says, for example, Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafi al-layli wan nahari la ayatin li ulil albab, where Allah said, indeed in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and day, in it are signs for those of understanding. Imagine the natural theologians at the time that were looking for God, that turned away from the dogma of Christianity, had come across these ayat and the true and the real interpretation or translation of these ayat. They would have inclined towards this, because this was in line with what they were looking for. You know, so Islam also encourages us to engage with the material world, study it, do the science. It is a means of drawing closer to Allah. And this is where Allah says, indeed, we read this ayah already, but another very interesting ayah in the Quran where Allah says, and Allah brought you out of your mother's wombs not knowing anything, and then he gave you hearing and sight and intellect, so that perhaps you would be thankful, you would be grateful. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, he is the one that gave us our senses. He is the one that gave us our intellect. Two things Allah is mentioning here: our senses, hearing and sight, and the intellect, the mind, the intellect. Both things which are required for us to understand and engage with the study of the world. Why? So that we can be grateful. In other words, Allah is telling us this thing we call science today, Allah has given this out to us, the human being, the ability to engage in the science. So when we reflect upon the world, we use our sciences to gather data and study the world, and then we ponder upon it and we reason upon it. This will allow us to appreciate the signs of Allah and bring us closer to him and allow us to worship him, be grateful to him. But unfortunately, many atheist scientists today have just gone off on a tangent with this stuff, right? So again, point here, Allah, the Quran is showing us that balance between, or showing us why or how we can engage in the material world, why God gave us those senses, why we should engage in studying the material world, because it all brings us back to our Creator, something that the Christian world didn't have at that time. Islam promotes the use of reason. How many ayat tell us to ponder, to reason, to reflect, to understand? You know, as here in the 29th chapter, verse 35, we left some of the town there as a clear sign for those who use their reason. So many ayat, brothers and sisters, in the Quran, where Allah constantly, continuously is telling us to reason, to reflect, to engage in thinking. You know, so the balance was always there between reason and revelation in Islam. That perfect balance was always there. And another balance that was always there, which was the balance between the vertical and the horizontal. Islam doesn't tell you to become a monk, go into a monastery and lock yourself up. No, Islam tells you to engage in the world, to engage in commerce, to engage in trade, do business, earn your livelihood, live in this world. And through living in this world is the means of your worshipping your Creator. You know, the Prophet ﷺ was a merchant himself. One call in his book, the Prophet of Peace, phenomenal book. I really recommend everyone to read it. One of the things he highlights about the Prophet, peace be upon him, heavily is that he was a prophet of trade. He's someone that encouraged trade, encouraged business. And this was one of his amazing traits. Islam encourages and it brings together these two planes, the horizontal plane and the vertical plane in a very beautiful way. You know, something that the Enlightenment thinkers were forced to try and achieve because of the imbalance in Christianity. And if they had come across Islam, maybe the Enlightenment would never have taken place. There wouldn't have been a need for it. Islam also comprehensively addresses all aspects of life, even the suffering that we go through in life. Something we don't need to go into here because we mentioned it earlier, about explaining to us that life is a test, and explaining to us the rewards of being patient through suffering, how we benefit through suffering, how it's an opportunity for us to get closer to Allah, how it's an opportunity for us to attain paradise, how it's an opportunity for us to get expiation for our sins, etc., etc. So many wisdoms behind suffering and hardships, right? So Islam provides a comprehensive account. Again, that point I made, if Islam had made it to the rest of Europe, in the year 732, for example, because that was the pivotal moment where the Muslims made it very close to making it to the rest of Europe. If they had won the Battle of Taurus, the Muslims would have, Europe would have been Muslim today, right? If that had happened, possibly, right, obviously there's many other factors, but possibly the Enlightenment would have never had to take place, and hence we would have never had to end up with a world which is godless, this secular world that we're a part of, because Islam had that perfect balance, but it didn't happen. However, nevertheless, Islam is here today. Muslims are here in Europe today. But then we may think, well, why aren't things changing? And I think there's many reasons. It's something for us to ponder upon from a Dawah perspective. To conclude, we're not living Islam, and I think this is a very big thing. Instead, we're living as everyone else, just with the Muslim name badge. I think one of the biggest issues we have is that we claim to be Muslim, but we live no different from the atheists in many ways, and therefore we run into the same problems that the atheists run into. And this is something we need to fix within ourselves first and foremost. We need to try, myself included, more than anyone else probably. We need to really focus on ourselves and connect with Allah, and once we do that, everything will start falling into place. We can't lead if we're not examples ourselves, So, and this is why much of our dawah isn't that effective today. And I mean, look at the dawah that's taking place online. A lot of the dawah. Look at the problems. Look at the way we're presenting Islam. I mean, if we just do a quick browse, go to YouTube and do a search, just search dawah, or go to Google and search dawah. Look at the stuff that comes up. A lot of the videos on the first page, you'll be surprised, not surprised, but you'll see that there's either this brother refuting this brother, this individual making a refutation to this person, this person reacting to this person, all of this type of stuff. And it literally has nothing to do with the fundamental foundations of dawah, or the key concepts and ideas that we need to be sharing with non-Muslims. Where is that stuff? Where is the information on that first page of YouTube or Google, which tells you about who Allah is, which speaks about Tawheed, which speaks about how Islam gives meaning to life and accounts for these realities? It's not there. It's not there. And it's a problem on both parts. It's a problem on the part of the content creator, and it's a problem on the part of those that watch this content as well. Because we're watching the stuff that is and by watching it, we're encouraging it. And when we're encouraging it, we're encouraging people to make that same content, which is not really stuff that's being justified under the umbrella of dawah. It's a huge problem. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, I'll share this one thing with you quickly here. A brother just called me earlier today, and he told me, there's a brother I just spoke to the other day, non-Muslim, wanted to become Muslim. He went onto YouTube, did a search for Islam, and he came across just certain brothers refuting each other, and he got really confused, and he went to the mosque, and the mosque got him in touch with this particular brother, and he had to clarify a lot of things for this person to highlight to him that what you came across and what you saw is not the key things you need to be focusing on. We need to be focusing on the foundations. But imagine the difficult job of him now having to rectify that issue. And imagine the perception that these things are creating in the minds of non-Muslims. When people are looking for the answers to the meaning of life, who am I? Where am I here? Who created me? They're looking, but all they're seeing when they search for Islam online is such and such refutes such and such. So and so is responding to so and so. I mean, how are we, when they see this stuff, what are they going to think? Oh, on one end, these Muslims claim to follow and worship the creator of the heavens and the earth, and on the other hand, they are just, well, it seems like they have some issues, very trivial issues that they can't agree upon. So from a dawah perspective, it's highly problematic. There's some key things that we need to be talking about and sharing and encouraging by watching the right type of content, inshallah. Anyway, so we need to engage in the dawah, brothers and sisters, and we need to engage in rectifying ourselves, and we need to engage in sharing the message of Islam. Here's a beautiful quote that I'm not going to read out to you, that you guys can read for yourselves. A very beautiful quote, which I think summarizes a lot of what we've discussed today. And it highlights the situation that humanity finds itself in the world today. and the choice that people are presented with, you know. So we're born, and people wake up in a world which is godless, which is has turned away from the creator of the heavens and the earth, and therefore we're born in a world which is not going to satisfy the human being and not going to help them fulfill the purpose of their very existence, which is to recognize Allah and to worship Allah. And until and unless they find that truth, they're never going to be happy, they're never going to be satisfied, you know. And there are certain people that don't want them to recognize this truth, as has been the case throughout history for whatever reasons, you know. So it's a beautiful opportunity. We find ourselves in a very interesting time for the da'wah as well, that people are looking for answers, and hopefully we've just seen at least a shred of how Islam, and I'll just briefly mention some ayah. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, I really encourage you guys, please, 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 if you take one thing away from today, make the Quran a central part of your lives going forward. Just make it the book that you study, you know, and we have translations today. Have it with you, study it, read it, finish it, read it again, finish it, read it again. Make it a part of your DNA, because this is the book that's going to save us, our families, our friends, and it's the book that's going to save all of the rest of humanity, that are our brothers and sisters in humanity who deserve the message and need the message as much as we do. And they're lost. They're lost. They're completely lost. You know, they're in pain in most cases, and they need this message, and we have to share this message with them. You know, and we can see it. The world's getting worse and worse. You know, things are getting worse and worse. I mean, the solution is Islam. The solution is Islam. What we have to be able to do is know that solution, and know it well enough, and in a way where we can articulate it and communicate it with our non-Muslim brothers and sisters in humanity, inshallah. So brothers and sisters, I'll wrap up here. If you have any questions, please put them in the questions section below. I'm going to pause the mic for 1 minute. So I'll just give you guys a bit of or 2 minutes, give you guys a bit of a breather and an opportunity to write down your questions and to post them. Inshallah, this will be recorded and it will be up on the Sapience webpage. So definitely check it out there, or share it with people that haven't watched it, inshallah. So yeah, any questions in relation to what we've discussed today, please put them in the question section and I'll address them. I'm going to mute the mic now for 2 minutes, inshallah. Okay, so Bismillah, I said 2 minutes, but I'm going to start a bit earlier because there's some questions there already. Keep posting your questions, inshallah. We'll try to do this for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because I know we've overrun by probably 30 minutes. I know you guys are probably used to an hour. So may Allah bless you for staying on. So the question by, I think it's Tariq Hassan. He says, I'm already in love. Oh, no, sorry. That's Jazakallah khair, brother Tariq Hassan, for your comment. May Allah bless you. Adimi says, well, I can understand that we need spiritualism as well, but how do we grasp this spirituality? Okay, so if I understand you correctly, I think one of the things Sheikh Fahd Taslim told me a few days ago, because I asked the same question to him on a live stream that I was doing with him on my channel, he basically said, look, the roadmap is there for us. The Prophet ﷺ has given us everything that we need to do to be able to connect with Allah and get closer to Allah. All we have to do is act upon it. So if I'm getting your question right, is we need to go back to the basics. We need to have a good, strong understanding and grasp of our philosophy. When I say philosophy, I mean the tenets of our deen. What is our deen? What is Islam? And also understand what are the fundamental principles and tenets of Islam, and start practicing them to the best of our ability. And through that, we're going to start seeing change in our own lives. And I know we live in a time which really affects us as well. The world around us is designed to turn you away from God. It's designed to do anything and everything but remind you of Allah. So we need to really, go back to the drawing board and hopefully help ourselves and fix ourselves, and then be able to and continue to carry on delivering the message to others. Give dawah to people. And hopefully we can appreciate today. One of my objectives was so we can really appreciate why we've ended up where we've ended up, and what the mindset or what creates the modern man and modern woman and their mindset, so we can really address them, inshallah. So hopefully that addresses that point. Okay. Okay, Nadia says postmodernism has led to the idea of subjective morality. Since this is uh, a very unstable ground, will it collapse, inevitably lead to the idea of absolute objective morality? Or is that something that the West will never accept in the postmodern society? So look, that's a very interesting question. I think there's a few things here. People, number one, are starting to realize that the past couple of centuries, from the Enlightenment all the way up to this postmodern world that we are part of today, there are some fundamental issues. We are having issues accounting for what's morally good and bad. Especially now, postmodernism, like we said, it pushes the idea there are no absolutes, there is no objective reality, there are no truths. Everything is subjective and relative. Although this may work temporarily, why people, again, like we said, it's a verse to human nature. So people are going to realize this, and they're going to start to look for alternatives, something that grounds them a bit better, that gives them a bit more, makes things a bit more stable for them. And therefore they're going to look elsewhere. And like I said, I think they're already looking elsewhere. Hence, people like Jordan Peterson are becoming very popular, because he's almost like the new age existentialist philosopher of our times. Because because he appeals to many of the ideas, but he's given them a very novel, modern spin. And some of the stuff he's doing is brilliant, But I think, and the interesting, funny thing is, all of the things he mentions is everything you'll find in Islam. Everything is there and more. But we just need to find a way, as modern Muslims living in this time, we need to find a way of being able to go to our source texts, find these truths which are going to appeal to the modern man and woman, and deliver it to them in a way they understand. That's where we're failing, and that's what we need to do, inshallah. I think that's going to, and generally speaking, I think it's going to be a difficult uphill struggle, because look, let's face it, the past couple of centuries have just exploited the nafs, meaning it's all been about you and whatever you want. The world is your oyster. Go and achieve it. Go and have it. Hedonism, especially today, this idea that just go and fulfill your desires, enjoy yourself, do whatever you want, is so prevalent. And when the nafs is spoiled to such a degree, it's hard. It's hard to repent and stay away from one sin. And I'm sure we can all testify to this. Imagine for a person whose whole life revolves around doing everything that just satisfies their bestial, their lower nature. It's gonna be an uphill struggle. It's gonna be a battle within that person. It's gonna be a battle between the fitrah, that pure soul which is yearning for Allah, and that lower human self which is inclining towards the dunya. And if they've gotten to the point where there's something, they know there's an agitation, and they start looking, when they come across the message of Islam, and if it's communicated clearly to them, inshallah, I really believe they will incline towards Islam. And many people are hence turning towards Islam today. Mir says, Imran, even the first picture, the church is man worships man. Absolutely, in a way you're right. In a way you're right, because it was all about, the authorities, or the religious authorities at least, wanting to get the masses to focus on them and to almost make them objects of worship. And it's interesting, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, where he says, come to a common term between us and you, referring to the Christians and the Jews, but where Allah then stipulates the three things: that we don't associate any partners with Allah, we don't worship anyone besides Allah, and that we don't take each other as lords. And I thought that was very interesting that Allah mentions we don't take each other as lords. And it says something seems to be prevalent throughout the history of Christianity, where certain people in power have almost wanted to take that position, where they wanted to become almost that deity as a human which other people worship and turn to as a religious authority. So it's a very interesting point. Yeah, so we can see it that way as well, bro. SubhanAllah. Okay. Okay, let's see. SubhanAllah, there's loads of questions here, brothers and sisters. I don't think we'll be able to go through all of them. But let me just see if there's anything else that we haven't addressed. So just bear with me, inshallah. Yep, but Hashmi says, the whole individuality, the philosophy of individualism, materialism, it's all in line with atheism. Yeah, it just goes hand in hand. Like I said, it's that hat. You can see atheism is the hat that fits this postmodern head the best. It just fits. Not because it's rational or it makes sense or it's true, it just fits. And it makes things comfortable for them because atheism removes, accountability and that, everything related to that. So yeah, of course it fits. It's when the brother says, what do you think Musab says, what do you think the future holds? Will people turn back to God? I heard that a lot of young people buy into atheism and naturalism, but a lot of people turn to spirituality later on. So my question is, what comes after the postmodern world? I think that transition is taking place right now already, and I think people are looking, they're searching. Some people are turning towards religion. Those that are coming across the true message of Islam are turning towards Islam. But also remember, brothers and sisters, we live in a world where Islam, the picture of Islam is very negative. It's misrepresented a lot as well, right? So hence it keeps people away. But Allah is in control of everything. Allah will guide whom He wills, inshallah. But if we want to attain some of the reward in that process, then we need to start thinking of these questions. And it's a very good question. So I think people are turning back. Some will turn towards, and this is why, like I said, people like Jordan Peterson are very popular. Some will turn towards such individuals. Others will turn towards paganism. Paganism is becoming very popular these days too. Lots of people, and again, why? It's very interesting because it's a type of a pick and mix way of life. Choose your own gods, choose your own way of spirituality, experiment. See, it's just this. It's the way we've been indoctrinated. So paganism is very appealing too for some people. Although logically, if you think about it, an atheist becoming a pagan is just strange. Where's the logic and rationality in that which you champion so much as an atheist? And we've seen many countless examples. I've heard it from many brothers. Many atheists are turning towards paganism. Yes, so we're going to wrap up now. I know subhanAllah, it's actually time for Maghrib in the UK, past the time. I just realized. Jazakallah khair for whoever put that reminder up. So let's take just one last one. MashaAllah, some of your comments are brilliant, guys, because it's almost like you guys are thinking about, how we engage with people now, what we do, and how we deliver the message to them. Because some of these aren't really questions, they're just thoughts, and it's beautiful to see. May Allah bless you guys, MashaAllah. Okay, guys. So yeah, if you go to the Sapience website, this should be uploaded onto the Sapience website once the live stream is done. If you just go to the webinar section under Learn, it'll be there as a webinar that's saved, inshallah. So the slides should be on there too. I know I wasn't able to answer all your questions because it's time for Maghrib. We have to go now. If you guys want more information on this, shameless plug, on my channel on epistemics, I've been doing loads of videos on these topics recently where I go into specific details on specific points. So you guys can go check out. That's epistemics, EPISTEMIX. So it's Imran Hussein, epistemics. So if you search that on YouTube, you'll find my channel. You can find a lot of content on this there. Sapience Institute, we've got loads more webinars coming out. There'll be loads more linked to this stuff and other stuff and profound topics. So definitely register to the other upcoming webinars that you guys, if you haven't already, inshallah. And yeah, may Allah bless you guys. I will join you next week on Monday now. Me personally, I've got a webinar on I think it's on the oneness of God. Divine oneness. Yes, I think it's on oneness. So I will see you guys for that, inshallah. May Allah bless you guys. Please share this, and until next time, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.